Hi, I'm Aaron Zarian,
I'm Matt Cummings.
and this is Property Espresso.
What's Property Espresso, Marin?
What's Property Espresso? Property Espresso is a series of video blogs that help locals, the community, with information that is useful.
Sounds useful.
And that's why I'm videoing you today.
Oh, maybe I can be useful.
Well, Matt, we had a bit of a chat a couple of weeks ago, and it sparked my thought process to get you on video to talk about your ideas on coastal erosion and some forms of mitigation that you implement in your business. And so we'll just have a chat about that. So in May 2021, the Auckland City Council released a report, the geotechnical report that they'd taken them about 12 months to create, which covered over 3,000 kilometres of coastline. And the idea was to look at potential areas for erosion of the coastline, including parks, beaches and private land. And from that aspect, they've generated susceptible line along the coastline for 2050, 2080 and beyond. And so a few people have got a little bit concerned that live on cliff tops or near beaches. I just wondered if you could elaborate on how they could mitigate any erosion that they've got.
Yeah, well, it's not a very good time to be living on a cliff top at the moment after the weather events that we had last year. Probably getting a little bit worried, and the number of slips that we've been to see is honestly a little bit scary. I think there's a few reasons for it, and it shouldn't be necessarily a surprise to anyone. We can go into that. And the thing is, if you understand why it's happening at an accelerated rate all of a sudden, then you can take steps to mitigate that.
Is it mainly cliff top areas, or do you also get called in for land that's on a lower level that could potentially be affected?
It's a combination. Obviously, where water flows and concentrates is probably where you're likely to get the most erosion, most severe erosion. Or, of course, unstable land that's generally unstable, so not supported from one side, like a cliff, can topple into the sea if it gets sufficiently waterlogged to turn into a liquid. Okay. Think the kind of liquefaction that we saw in Christchurch during the earthquake, where there was a vibration and a certain amount of groundwater, and that dirt essentially just turned into a liquid. Well, that's kind of what happens during a slip too.
Okay. It's very apparent that last year during the storms, the beaches lost a lot of sand. I know there's some remediation work going on at some of the North Shore beaches to try and correct it. But every time they try to correct it, you get another storm and half of it disappears. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, as a long-term solution, what could be a potential for making sure that that person is safe in their property?
The beaches are an interesting one. The sand doesn't really tend to go anywhere. It just evens out and it goes down to the sea, but it doesn't go a long distance away in the sea. It's just not exactly where you would want it if you want a stable house on the beach. But the sand will kind of come and go in cycles. It's not gone forever, but that doesn't actually help when you've got a garden that's being eroded in an extreme event. So in a way, you're dependent a little bit on your neighbours when you're on the beachfront, because you've got such a long expansive, and this is the case for all the coastal erosions. You're always dependent on what's happening next to you as well, just to at least some extent. And the more neighbours you can get involved in your project for mitigation and resilience,
Yep.
the more effective it's going to be, like exponentially so.
Right.
So collaboration in that sense is very important to having an effective strategy.
Sure. Because you can't just protect
That's right.
your piece of the cliff.
Or you can try. Yeah. I don't know if you've heard the story of the guy in Narrowneck who's building a seawall just around his part of the cliff, down at the ocean level, and it's this semicircular shape. But there's only so much they can do on one title. At some point the cliff next to it's going to erode away, and you're going to end up with the thing being undermined. It's a costly exercise.
Yeah. You would think there would be a force or a particular organisation that could bring those people together to have a common solution.
That would be nice, and particularly if the common solution was a lot more cost effective than what we've generally been seeing. Like there's quite a big range of engineered solutions where we've got grouted nails and mesh and geotextile, and a lot of those kind of things. Gabion rock walls, that's another example of a gravity version, ballast if you like, and protection. But they're all pretty expensive because they involve moving large masses and highly specialised equipment, and there's risk involved in that, and it's a lot of investment to be doing those kind of things. So if we can reduce that upfront cost significantly with the type of management that we're trying to do, then we're more likely to be able to get more people involved.
Okay.
So
you've got you're very environmentally friendly, and with Matt's business, him and Sphere are co-owners of Untangled, and you don't just do landscapes, you also do remediation work on cliffs as well, don't you?
Yeah, it all falls into the landscaping, but we're regenerative landscapers in that sense. So regeneration to me is really building soil, and part of building soil is not losing soil, so erosion fits right into that, or mitigating erosion fits right into that. It's super important that we try and hold on to what topsoil we've got left, because it's disappearing and it's going into the sea real fast. So, and if we can't hold on to it, then we've got to build more. But we can probably do both, and that's probably the best strategy.
You've done a lot of research and study on regenerative landscaping, and you've not just within this country, but you've been abroad as well to Australia to see how they operate over there. What were your findings compared to New Zealand?
I think New Zealand is quite blessed in a way where, it's a mixed bag. We're blessed in terms of climate, and we can do pretty much anything we want. We've got a lot of rainfall in most areas, so there's very limited water shortages compared to most other countries, a lot of other countries around the world, who struggle a lot more for water.
Okay. Does that determine the sort of plants that you're going to implement?
It just gives you more options because, so we have practical, plants can survive here more easily than they can in Australia, for example. So in Australia you really have to start with pioneers, but here you can start with a lot wider of a range of things. You can kind of leapfrog the beginning process if you're doing regeneration. But we have biosecurity and a lot of protections around our natives, which is fair enough. And that means that there's quite a few plants which you can't use here as a permaculturist. Permaculture is a little bit different to conservation. It's not just about the native system, it's actually about people in partnership with nature.
Sure.
And so there's more room in the philosophy for using non-native and exotic plants. But you read the room, and there's a place for conservation for absolutely for sure, and there's a place for permaculture when we're dealing with degraded soils and we need to get a living system implemented.
Yeah. So just refocusing on
on the erosion.
On the erosion there. You mentioned some man-made solutions. Your solution is a little bit different to that. It's more to do with roots.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It wouldn't necessarily describe it as our solution. We've kind of brought it to Auckland in a way. We've been working with Vetiver Systems New Zealand, who are based in Kerikeri, and they've been propagating an erosion control grass which is popular all around the world in tropical climates for its deep and fibrous root systems, and it's got quite a few benefits and just like key features, if you like, that make it a really good for this kind of application. The first one is it's a sterile clone, so it actually doesn't produce seeds that are viable, so it can't spread. If you plant it and it only clumps, it can't go anywhere that you didn't plant it and propagate it on purpose.
That's a good thing.
Yep, that's definitely keeps it controllable. Unlike, for example, bamboo, which will clump real fast. It's another type of grass, incidentally, but also a lot of other erosion control measures are designed to spread, and that's how they function as erosion control.
Okay.
But then they have that double-edged sword of spreading too much.
Yeah. I know a lot of cliff erosion has resulted in Putukala trees falling off the edge, and when you walk along the coastline you see either dead Putukalas or they've rerouted further down. I guess these grasses have got an advantage over Putukala trees because they're not going to fall, are they?
Yeah, that's right. So trees are an interesting one. There's a perception out there that trees are really good for erosion prevention. It's true on flat ground and on plains and in flood zones. Not so true on a cliff, because you think about, especially coastal, you've got a lot of wind blowing, and the wind moves this rigid lever in a tree trunk, and that transfers all of those loads into the ground via the roots. So you're actually introducing a lot of dynamic loading to the soil, and that can actually have a loosening and cracking effect on the cliff. So compare that to a grass which has a flexible canopy above ground and flexible leaves. The grass is just going to blow over, and the roots aren't going to get any force applied to them whatsoever.
Okay. How deep do the roots go on these grasses?
Vetiver grass, they've been documented 6 meters on the average, about normal is a 6 meter depth. It takes a fair few years to get to that depth, and we haven't been using them long enough in New Zealand and in New Zealand clays and things to see. We haven't dug them up again to see whether they actually do get to 6 meters, but that's been seen overseas. The other thing in New Zealand is that they do have a dormant winter, because it does get a little bit cold. They are a tropical grass, but they certainly do go a fair few meters down, and certainly more than far enough to interact with all the layers that they need to. The other thing, Marin, is that the grass is only one part of it. So when you're thinking about a composite material, which is what we're trying to do with the soil, we're trying to turn the soil into a composite material rather than just... So, if you think about concrete, It's the difference between reinforced concrete and concrete itself. So one of them is pretty brittle and easy to crack, and then just falls apart as soon as it does crack.
Yep.
But reinforced concrete, which has fibers inside it in terms of steel rebar, is a lot more resilient to damage.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually.
We're doing exactly the same thing by putting roots into the soil system, putting reinforcing into it. Yeah. So then there's that part of it, but then there's the resin part of it as well. So in a composite, as I said, you've got fibers, but then you've got the resin that surrounds the fibers. In a fiberglass or in a concrete, the resin is the cement and the aggregate. And in a soil system, your resin equivalent is the topsoil itself. Okay. And if you're putting fibers through that, then the other part is to improve your resin. So we can actually, that's part of the regenerative process, is getting the biology to go to work, the microbiology in the soil to go to work, and bacteria, when they're doing well and thriving, they'll make glues in order to stick themselves to their food source, and it creates actually a really sticky soil. And that obviously has huge benefits when it comes to preventing erosion. So you can end up with surface water flows that are not muddy. They'll flow just over the soil and they won't take it away because those bacteria have been working so hard on producing those glues that end up creating microaggregates in the soil and sticking it all together.
Okay. You mentioned pH and the condition of the soil. Yep. So across the North Shore, does it vary, or is it all pretty much the same?
The condition of the soil is pretty much 100% dependent on how it's been managed recently, especially in an urban environment. Right. It's if it's been exposed to herbicides or pesticides, insecticides, that kind of thing, it can have a really degraded microbiome, and it can be more or less dust that's just kind of sitting in position. And that's really very susceptible to erosion compared to a living soil system. Because the bacteria is only the first layer. The next layer is the fungus, which wrap hyphae around all of those microaggregates that bacteria create. And then, so that's like another layer of fibers in addition to the grass roots. And you start to build this multi-layered, self-repairing and self-perpetuating system, which is cheaper than any engineered solution to install and to operate. And it just makes sense, really.
Yeah, so there's a lot of symbiosis going on.
Absolutely.
And you would have to really assess on an individual basis what the solution would be for that area, I guess.
Yeah. There's plenty of tools in the toolkit. There's also different threats that are more at the forefront for each property. Right. So whether you're low-lying coastal and you have the potential of having storm surge, that might be like you might not have much luck with just a vegetative solution. You might need a hybrid. Right. So you might need some gabions, you might need some boulders, you might just get some actual mass in there that's not going to be washed away. And then you might stabilize the in-between of that system with plants and with vegetative solution.
So what sort of density of planting would you need to do?
We typically do vetiver on a contour basis, and we do a contour every 1 meter elevation change. Right. Does that make sense? So if you've got a area that needs stabilization, which is say 5 meters above sea level at the top and 2 meters above sea level at the bottom, we'd probably want to put 3 contours on there. And then you would multiply your linear meterage by the 3 to get the number of total linear meters of planting. And we provide quotes at a linear meter installed rate.
Okay. Final question. From start to finish, how long does this sort of process take?
From start to finish, in terms of from initial assessment through to the plants being up to their full growth point, or
Well, I guess from
just in terms of being installed and ready and growing.
Yep.
Well, at the moment our lead time's pretty long, but
Well, you're obviously in demand.
yeah, you could say that. The actual installation time is generally only, it obviously varies entirely based on the size of the site and the access to the site. If it's a cliff and we're abseiling, it'll take a lot longer. And if it's a beachfront, then it might be just a few days. We do need to be careful in how we set up the contours so that the water doesn't turn into a diverted stream. It needs to be a water spreading and calming device, not a diversion and concentrating device. So there's a little bit of care involved in lasers and things and setting up the contours. But then once that's sorted, it's a pretty quick job, generally. Yeah.
You mentioned about New Zealand being a different environment to Australia and less exotic, if I put the term.
Less continental. It's a little more moderate.
Subtropical. What are the seasonal demands on the grasses that you use or the solutions that you have?
Yeah, so it does mean we're a little further south, a little colder than Australia, and than the native habitat that vetiver comes from. So that means that what is normally a year-round growing grass has a dormant season in New Zealand. So we can't actually plant the grass without it going through some severe growth impediments outside of the time between October and March. So there's a planting season essentially. So it actually works out quite well because we can do all of our design work and specification during the winter period when actually the erosion is occurring most and making itself obvious. And then in summer when everything's dried out and things are easier to access, and we can put all the grasses in and plant in between them. And the only downside being that you do also tend to need irrigation at that point, just to make sure that they're all okay for the first year. So we have a temporary style of irrigation using mobile water tanks that we can put in. That can then just be packed out. So we rent an irrigation system essentially. So you don't have to pay the full cost of having one with all the controllers and all that and owning them. We just rent them to you for a year for the first year.
So if people have got a water retention system already on their property, you could feed into
Absolutely, we can just hook into that.
Okay. Cool.
It would need to be of sufficient capacity.
Yep.
That's the only caveat.
Okay. All right. So if there are people who are living along the coastline that might be interested in your services, they can just contact you directly or email you?
Absolutely. Just get in touch with Untangled Landscapes.
Yep. So,
We're based in Redvale. So that's relatively central for North Auckland, and we work over the bridge as well. We've got our passports handy.
So if you're interested, give Matt a call at Untangled, and I'm sure he'll be able to help you. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.